Well, today's gospel is pretty dramatic. We meet a man who is tormented by demons. He's so tormented that he's been chained and shackled, and now he's living naked among the tombs. This poor man is not only suffering from demons, but he is also ostracized by his own community. He no longer even has his own name. When Jesus asks him his name, the man replies, Legion, which is simply a reference to the enormous number of demons within him. These demons interact with Jesus. They seem to understand that he has power over them, and they beg for some mercy. They don't want to be cast into the abyss, whatever that was, but instead request that Jesus let them enter into the pigs that are nearby. Jesus agrees, and when the demons are released from the man and enter the pigs rush into the lake and drown. Apparently, this fate is better than whatever the abyss had in store. Wow, so much action. Shackles, chains, shouting demons, stampeding swine. When the demons are gone and the dust settles, we learn that the man is now in his right mind and is calmly and fully clothed, seated at the feet of Jesus. This man is finally free. Free of whatever had been tormenting and oppressing him for so many years. This week, we remember another kind of freedom. On Thursday, we celebrated Juneteenth, the holiday that commemorates the day in 1865 when the last major group of enslaved people who were living in Texas finally gained their freedom. This holiday celebrates the end of the institution of slavery in this country, and it provides us an opportunity to reflect on just what that slavery was like and the reverberations of that system of oppression that are still felt today. We know that slavery was not just practiced in the South, but that here in Connecticut, including in Wallingford and even St. Paul's, we perpetuated and profited from the practice. Outside the front entrance to this church, we have 2 witness stones placed in honor of Grace and Esau, 2 people who were enslaved by the Brockett family that attended St. Paul's. We know that Grace and Esau eventually were freed after both Titus and Mary Brockett had died. Grace and Esau together farmed and engaged in trade here in Wallingford. But these 2 were not the only people enslaved by parishioners of St. Paul's. And not everyone who was enslaved had as happy an ending as Grace and Esau. Through the research of our Resolution 7 committee here at St. Paul's, and the research commissioned by the Wallingford Historic Preservation Trust, we have evidence of at least 10 more people who were enslaved by members of this parish. And we can safely presume there were more than that. Even one of our rectors, the Reverend Samuel Andrews, enslaved at least 2 people. Most of the enslaved likely remained that way until they died. And lest we be tempted to think that slavery here in Wallingford was somehow more benign than in the South, remember that some of the evidence we have about these people comes from ads placed for runaway slaves. Think of it. Life was bad enough for enslaved people in Connecticut to risk tremendous punishment by running away. And regardless of how some enslaved people may or may not have been treated on a day-to-day basis, the fact was they were not free. They had no control over their own lives or the lives of their families. We don't know the names of most of the people enslaved by St. Paul's parishioners, but we do know some. As I name them now, let's remember all of those who were enslaved in this community, including those whose names we do not know. We remember Grace, Esau, Tony, Jack, Peg, Cuff, and Nellie. Freedom. It's what we celebrate on Juneteenth. It's what the tormented man in today's gospel experienced after his encounter with Jesus. Freedom is also a theme of Paul's letter to the Galatians. In particular, Paul was arguing that the Gentile Galatians were free from having to follow Hebrew law. But in a larger sense in this letter, Paul made an argument for freedom from anything which might stand in the way of living a truly authentic life of faith. In the passage from Galatians we heard today, Paul also speaks of freedom from those distinctions that divide us. In a profound statement of unity and equality, Paul wrote, "There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus." This kind of freedom, the freedom from distinctions and differences that have divided us, and the freedom to live in unity and without structures and systems of oppression, this freedom can be threatening. Let's take a look at more of the gospel story. When the man formerly known as Legion had been freed from the demons and was at peace, the story tells us the people of the town saw him and were afraid. They were not awed by Jesus' power. They did not give thanks that this poor, tormented man was finally healed. Instead, they were afraid of the man, and they were afraid of Jesus, and they sent Jesus away. While they had been frightened of the man when he was possessed, his new situation was even more threatening to them. The people of the town had created a system for controlling and dealing with this man. They had kept him in his place, and now they didn't know what to make of him. His freedom disrupted the status quo. He no longer conformed to what they expected of him, and so they were afraid. When enslaved people were freed in this country, many white Americans also felt threatened. Their way of life, their racist worldview, even their theology was challenged. Disrupting the status quo is challenging. We all become comfortable with what we know, and we're often afraid when things change. But that's exactly what Jesus did. He challenged the status quo in the name of mercy, justice, and love. Jesus freed people from all kinds of oppression. He challenged the distinctions that divide us, and he promoted the kind of unity reflected in Paul's letter. Freedom is more than just the ability to do whatever we want. Let's look one final time at the gospel story. The man whom Jesus had healed wanted to travel with Jesus. And this makes sense. People in his hometown didn't want him. They didn't want anything to do with this man, and Jesus had just transformed this man's life, so of course he wanted to follow Jesus. But Jesus said no. He instructed the man instead to return home and to share with others what God had done for him. This would have taken a lot of courage, but the story tells us that the man did just as Jesus asked. So with freedom comes responsibility. The responsibility to use that freedom for the benefit of others, especially for those who may not have the same freedom and opportunity that we have. Our gospel friend had demons. Grace and Esau and others were literally enslaved. People today are constrained by poverty, discrimination, addiction, war, lack of access to health care and education, and so much more. In the face of all of this, we must remember, as Paul so eloquently reminded us, that we are all one. We are all God's children, equally deserving of the kind of freedom that we remember and celebrate today. In the collect for social justice that we will say together in just a few minutes, we will ask for God's grace that we may reverently use our freedom to employ it in the maintenance of justice in our communities and among the nations. So be it.